Welcome to Making the Cut podcast with Chris Hill and Sean Winter, where we help you succeed in life and business by sharing principles and strategies that guide some of the most successful people in the world.
Welcome to episode 21 of the Making the Cut podcast. I'm Chris Hill with my co-host, Sean Winter. Today on the show, we have Dorie Clark, a marketing consultant, speaker, and she's here to talk about her new book, Entrepreneurial You. But before we jump in, Sean, let's give a word from our sponsor, the Cordon Bleu.
That's right. You can become part of a great tradition of culinary excellence. With over 120 years of teaching experience, Le Cordon Bleu is well established as the global leader in culinary, wine, and hospitality education. Learn from a team of classically trained teaching chefs with years of experience working in Michelin star restaurants and the industry's finest kitchens. Earn the most respected culinary qualifications and live a truly unique cultural experience in one of their 35 institutes around the world. Your culinary journey starts today by applying at www.cordonbleu.edu. So with that, Chris, I am extremely excited to talk with Dorie today. She made a big impact with me from her book, Stand Out. It was truly a game changer. So why don't we give everyone a little intro before we jump right in?
Absolutely, Sean. So Dorie is an adjunct professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and the author of Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and as you just mentioned, Stand Out, which, Sean, was actually named the #1 leadership book of 2015 by Inc. magazine. She's a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review. She consults and speaks for clients including Google, Microsoft, and the World Bank. So with that, what do you say we jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Dorie, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going today?
It's going great. Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Well, Dorie, you have a great backstory. You have a great body of work that we're excited to dive into. Can you give the audience just a bit about your history?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually got my start in some non-traditional ways. These days, I write business books, including my most recent one, Entrepreneurial You, and I do some part-time teaching for the Fuqua School of Business at Duke, and consult and coach. But in my past, I have been a newspaper reporter. I was a spokesperson on political campaigns, including a gubernatorial campaign and a presidential campaign. I ran a bicycling advocacy nonprofit, and I have a master's in theological studies. So it's been a winding road to get to where I am. In fact, my first book was called Reinventing You, so that was sort of the genesis. But I know that some of your listeners may also have had eclectic paths, and for me, it really makes me committed to the idea of helping entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial professionals, whatever their field, including the culinary arts, stand out and get heard in an incredibly noisy and competitive marketplace these days.
And now, Dorie, was there a pivotal point in your career? You said something along the lines that there was a genesis or something, but what was the pivotal point that brought you to where you are in this current path?
Well, probably the most decisive moment for me actually was getting laid off from my first job. I just out of graduate school, I had gotten a job as a newspaper reporter, and that is probably a profession that I would have stayed in. I liked writing, I liked researching things. It was kind of a fit for my personality, and I think I would have been pretty happy making a career in it. But something that I didn't see at the time, and I think probably would have been hard for most people to see at the time, was that right when I was entering journalism, it was at its peak grandeur. Newspaper revenues in the year 2000 were actually the highest that they had ever been up to that point in history. Things were looking great. But of course, we all know now retrospectively that the internet was just about to disrupt the business model in a really fundamental way. And I think that that's something that almost all of us are facing these days, one way or another. I mean, even in the restaurant industry, you're talking about things like Eatsa, where people are ordering on iPads and machines are doing most of the cooking. So there's interesting parallels, but. After about a year working as a journalist, I ended up getting laid off. I was in the first wave of journalists losing their jobs. And that really shook up my plans and made me realize that I needed to make some different decisions about the future trajectory of my career.
Now, in terms of what you just mentioned with the entire industry being kind of caught off guard, I think a lot of us, as we go into the new world, the modern world, are maybe at risk of being the same thing personally, being caught off guard. With your book Reinventing You and Standing Out, and then Stand Out, is that part of the attraction to the work that you do with those books, and maybe part of the reason why you have the new book coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. It has been challenging for for most professionals to figure out how to navigate the seismic changes that we have been experiencing in the past couple of decades. I mean, it used to be that you could essentially follow the conventional wisdom, follow what your parents told you or what worked for them, and you would mostly be okay. But that has really changed and become radically disrupted. The things that many of us were told were safe bets have been proven not to be. And so we all need to start really taking initiative for our careers and being mindful that we have to keep developing ourselves and learning new skills throughout the course of our career. If we just take everything that we learned, when we're 22 years old and say, "Oh, that's enough, that's it," we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Especially because, frankly, in a lot of professional fields, whether we're talking literally about doctors, about lawyers, or about chefs and owners of restaurants, when you are, let's say in culinary school, I'm willing to bet that there is a negligible amount of time spent on the business mechanics of how to really be entrepreneurially successful. And those are some of the pieces of information that you need more than anything in order to have a successful and thriving and solvent long-term career. Those are things we have to pick up on our own through things like listening to this podcast. And so staying current is incredibly important. And that's exactly why I wrote Entrepreneurial You, because I really see this book in a lot of ways as the culmination of my work, kind of the capstone of the trilogy, as it were, because it's really important to build a career you want. It's really important to get recognized as being among the best in your field. That was the focus of my last book, Stand Out, how to do that. But even more than that, your career is not going to last. You're not going to have the opportunity to make an impact if you can't figure out how to make money from doing it. And so Entrepreneurial You is really about how to gear up your financial and business savvy in order to make a great living and be able to keep doing what you care about.
Dorie, you did touch on something when you said that in some of maybe the schools, the culinary schools more specifically, that the business and maybe the entrepreneurship kind of instruction is not there as much. Coming from culinary education, we would pepper in some business and kind of entrepreneurship type classes. But the problem that I saw is that those creative individuals, they don't want to focus on that. It's more fun for them to focus on the creative things. And I think that's where a lot of creative struggles. They struggle on tapping into the other side of the brain and maybe whether it's discipline or whatever it is, but just focusing on that business and entrepreneurial side or even wanting to learn about it in the sense that it's going to help you. Do you see that to be true as well?
Yeah, I think it's true in a lot of fields. But in fact, there's a classic example. One of the sort of all-time seminal business books is something called the EMyth by Michael Gerber. And these days, dash whatever sort of has electronic connotations like email or whatever. But when he says the EMyth, he wrote this book initially, 20 plus years ago, 30 years ago even, although he's updated and revised it since then. But for him, the EMyth, he was referring to the entrepreneurial myth. And one of the classic examples he gave was somebody who wanted to be a bakery owner because they liked to bake. They liked making pies or what have you. And so, okay, I'm going to open a bakery. And then the minute you open the bakery, you realize, oh, making pies is the least of it. I have to figure out staffing. I have to figure out how to pay people. I have to get all the permits from this city. And so ironically, oftentimes you don't even get to do the thing that was the pleasurable thing that made you want to open the bakery in the first place. And that is a crazy wake up call for most people. But I also think though, that in many cases, people can learn to love and appreciate the entrepreneurial elements of something. I mean, you can pay people, you can hire out for some of the tasks that you might not like. I mean, okay, compliance stuff, bookkeeping stuff, whatever. You can pay people to do that. But ultimately, if we're thinking about the fundamental elements of entrepreneurship, really the question, this is a little bit of a bias of mine because this is kind of the background that I come from. But it's sales and marketing. You can afford to get a lot of things wrong. I mean, ideally, you want to run a perfect business, although none of us does. But the one thing you cannot afford to get wrong is you need customers. If no one is buying your pies, if no one is coming to your restaurant, you will not have a restaurant. And so you can find help for administrative solutions, but you need to solve that fundamental question. How do you get customers in the door and coming back? And that is where really thinking creatively and embracing the entrepreneurial mindset can actually be fun and stimulating and satisfying because, ideally, the reason you're doing this is that you're creating a product that you love and that you care about and you think is really great. And you would like to see lots of people enjoying it. And so solving that puzzle of how to do it, I think that if we frame it right and we explain to creative people, hey, no, this is about getting your great stuff in front of more people, then that can kind of become an exciting challenge.
Is the first thing to do as somebody in that position to just maybe acknowledge that's one of the key drivers to my success?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I was actually just having a conversation the other day with a reporter, and she was doing an article about how sort of steps for people who wanted to start their own business. And one of the points that I made is that at least in the beginning, you should always handle sales and marketing yourself. That sometimes people just say, oh, well, I'll hire a salesperson, and they assume that that'll take care of it. And is it important to have coaching or good training or advice? Yes, absolutely. But it is a huge mistake to think that sales and marketing is just one other function that you can just plunk somebody in there and that they'll do it. No, this is the essence. This is the core of it. You have to early on take responsibility for getting out there and helping to gin up customers, because no one is ever going to be a more convincing salesperson than the founder, than the owner. If they don't believe you, if they won't buy from you, they're certainly not going to buy from some minion that you've hired. You need to get out there. And if sales are hard, if you're doing everything you can and sales are hard, that actually is good information initially as well. Because in the earliest days, the most important thing you can do as an entrepreneur is establish what is called a product market fit. And that is a kind of fancy term, but essentially what it means is you need to validate that customers actually want what you are proposing to sell. You need to get that part right. Once you do, then sure, you can bring in people to help and do sales stuff, do marketing stuff. But if you're in a downtown location, let's say, and you're trying to serve people steaks at 6 o'clock in the morning, that's not what people want. They want like smoothies and coffee and whatever. You need to realize like, okay, good concept, maybe slightly off. Let's tweak it a little bit, and then you can get it.
Now, Dorie, stepping back just a moment. A lot of the popular belief is that ideas come from this flash of insight. And I've heard you talk about this concept before. And can you talk a little bit about that so that people understand where do these ideas really truly come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two important thoughts about this. This is a subject that I covered pretty extensively in my most recent book, Stand Out. And so number one, the vast majority of insights do not come from a flash of insight. There is a kind of creative myth that has taken hold in terms of our cultural conversation about how great ideas form. And, the sexy story is, oh, it just came to me in a vision and then I knew. But the truth is almost all of those stories are actually fabricated. There's a great book for people who are interested in the creative process called How to Fly a Horse by Kevin Ashton, which actually talks about this. And literally, there are stories, examples of, like how Mozart composed certain symphonies. And over time, various biographers literally fabricated stories to try to bolster the idea that like, oh, he's such a singular genius. And in actuality, dude was poring over it for like 70 drafts. So I think it's important that people realize that, because I think sometimes we count ourselves out. If we don't have that flash of insight, we say, oh, well, other people must just have some special, je ne sais quoi that I don't. And that is absolutely untrue. They iterate through ideas just the way you and I do. The idea maybe starts out with a promising grain, but almost always it is not fully formed. It is not the perfect idea. You shape it. You keep shaping it based on feedback, based on talking to people, based on seeing what works. And then eventually you can get to the great idea. That's number one. Number two is that, okay, let's say you are fortunate enough to have a great flash of insight come to you. It doesn't happen that often, but it's not impossible. It can happen. And in fact, in Stand Out, I profile a woman named Rose Schumann who had that experience. Now, keeping in mind, the reason that she had that experience is that she had been grappling with the problem that she was trying to solve. In her case, it was about how to bring internet access to the world's poor. She'd been grappling with that problem for years. So she had a lot of thinking and a lot of data in her mind already about it. But when she did have her flash of insight, the way she told me, she said that it kind of came to her, and she spent about 4 hours writing down everything, every facet of the idea in her journal. She said, yeah, it took me 4 hours to write down the idea and capture it, and it took me 10 years to implement it. So even if you have the flash of insight, it really is about the sweat to make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. And Chris, I'm just going to jump in really quick because, Dorie, you mentioned a book, and I will say I've heard some people say that they struggle with the creativity part, even just coming up with certain ideas, and they want to come up with an original idea. There's a really cool book that I came across called Thinker Toys. Have you ever heard of that one, Dorie?
Oh, yeah, by Michael Michalko. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's just pulled it up, the handbook of creative thinking techniques, too. So for people that are trying to find ways to be more creative, it's got some really neat exercises. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Love that.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, so, sometimes I feel like as we're maybe trying to find our entrepreneurial you, or us, I guess you would say, we are maybe too close to the work, too close to, our career. Is it helpful to enlist friends, family, maybe even coworkers out there that can help us have a better understanding of what our strengths are and our weaknesses, that kind of thing?
Yeah, this is actually really important. So I'm glad that you pointed to that. One of the points that I talk about in Stand Out is trying to answer the question, how do you build a following around your idea? And this could be a social movement, or it could be, hey, I have a great new restaurant. People should come to it. But how do you get people besides you excited about an idea and willing to become advocates, become willing to try something and tell their friends to try it? And so what I discovered in the course of interviewing about 50 top experts across a spectrum of different fields is that ultimately it's a 3-step process how to do that. Step 1 is building your network. Step 2 is building your audience. And step 3 is building your community. And so what I mean by that is the first really essential step, building your network, that is about assembling a small group of trusted people around you, a group of trusted advisors. I like to think of it as a mentor board of directors. And these are the people who really help make you better. They're folks who you respect their ideas, you know that they have your best interests at heart, and they can serve as your sounding board to give you feedback about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. They can see things that we can't just because we're too close to the problem. So this really is the essential first step. Step 2 is building your audience, and that is about sharing your ideas publicly. This is about somehow getting out there so that other people in the wider world can be exposed to your ideas. Now, if you're a business person, maybe it's blogging or having a podcast or something like that. If you're in the restaurant world, maybe you're building an audience by starting a food truck or having a pop-up experiment or doing a guest chef appearance for a short stint, something like that, so that people can really see what you're doing. Maybe it's cooking at a charity dinner. And then finally, it's building a community, which is once you have started to gain traction and have people excited about your work, it's about really bringing them together so that you have a community of people who are not just passive participants and saying, oh, her stuff is great, but people who are active evangelists who say, no, you have to come, you have to try this.
And so to fast forward a little bit, with your book, Entrepreneurial You, let's say people have this idea, whether it did come to them or more likely they were just engaged in that topic so much that they finally formulated something, and now they want to actually make money doing it. You talk about there's obstacles that people have to overcome. So what are some of those struggles or obstacles that they have to go through first, and how do they overcome those to then start making money doing what they love?
Yeah. So, obviously in terms of obstacles that people might face, one obvious one is certainly just having the knowledge of how to monetize in different ways. And so we were talking about this a little bit earlier. But I think that especially because we exist in a world where, number one, a lot of people who receive sometimes very fine professional training don't necessarily get training on the business elements of what they're doing. They're sort of operating in the dark. And additionally, we also exist in a culture that in many ways shuns people talking about money. It's considered a little bit taboo. A lot of the information is proprietary, and people want to keep their trade secrets. They don't necessarily want to tell you where they get XYZ ingredient, or how much they pay for ABC, or what the proper going rate is for this other thing, or where's the best place to go to get workers' comp insurance for your employees. All these different things that are really essential to know. And so I really believe again, this is why building your network is so important, is that sometimes because that information is often not publicly available, having a private network of people that you trust, that you can turn to, is valuable, so that you can break through some of that opacity. But another challenge that people have in many ways is actually a mindset challenge. And it can be really hard for people to feel comfortable sometimes charging fairly for their work. In my book, Entrepreneurial You, I actually profile a guy named Andrew Warner who operates a website and a business called Mixergy. And it's a subscription business where people pay a monthly access fee. And Andrew has done more than 1,200 interviews with various entrepreneurs and startup founders and things like that. And so for a monthly subscription fee, you can, sort of Netflix style access any of these, but originally he was doing them for free. And, he was putting a lot of money into them. He had producers and editors and things like that. It was very high quality. And eventually he realized he was not going to be in good financial shape if he kept just shelling out money out of pocket without ever getting some form of remuneration. So when he started to charge, he was really nervous that people would rebel and that some people might even be nasty about it. And, of course, sure enough, not most people were fine, but there were some people that were like, oh, you sell out, all you want is money, blah, blah, blah. And that really can hurt. And I think for a lot of aspiring restaurateurs, that can be a tricky thing. I mean, obviously in our culture, we know that if you go to a restaurant, you should pay something, but being willing to charge fairly, feeling comfortable. If you're using premium ingredients, knowing that, oh my gosh, will the customers tolerate this? Or, you want to be paying a good, solid, maybe even above market wage to your servers so that you can provide a good quality of life for them and hopefully have better staff retention than is common in the industry. You want to be doing that, but will your customers accept it? We've all heard about Danny Meyer's experiments, for instance, with breaking the tipping culture and building that price in. These are interesting questions, and it takes a lot of courage and fortitude sometimes to stick with your decisions and put your flag in the ground and say, no, it's worth it. And I know that my customers will, if I explain it right, my customers will come to understand that it's worth it.
A lot of what you preach to, Dorie, is really similar to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jeff Goins, who speaks a lot to the writing and creative world.
Yeah.
With his most recent book, basically talking about beating the myth of the starving artist. I think a lot of folks that Sean and I connect with almost had this identity of, well, if I'm going to be doing this, then part of my rite of passage is being this, starving chef or culinary professional. I think, like you said too, some of it's the mindset of realizing that maybe I don't have to do this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so much of our culture is built up on myths of what this sort of archetypal phenomenon is. But you know what? I mean, I hope that anyone who read Anthony Bourdain's early accounts of his life in the kitchen, probably read, how everyone was just tanked up on drugs all the time. I mean, hopefully, people reading that aren't reading that and say, oh, well, clearly I need to be both starving and addicted to heroin. I mean, duh, we can change. We don't have to do it the same way that other people have done, especially if they're doing it in ways that are dysfunctional. And I would argue that if you're taking drugs every night, that's pretty dysfunctional. And I would argue that a lot of the ways that we have handled and talked about money in our culture are dysfunctional. It is 100% possible to be operating in the restaurant industry and being successful financially and doing that with integrity. Those are absolutely compatible. We just need to seek out the skills and the knowledge through things like listening to this podcast and reading books in a targeted way. It's not like you have to go get an MBA necessarily, although certainly like you, Sean, you could, but you just need to seek out that knowledge and be willing to take it in, and also just be willing to recognize that the frames of the past are changing and that they might be kind of limited.
And now, Dorie, one bullet point for your book I see in the description is developing multiple revenue streams. Can you talk about maybe why you bring this point up?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of this part about developing multiple income streams, and certainly it is a realization born from my earliest experiences getting laid off as a newspaper reporter. We all know, I think most people have come up, even if you don't have a lot of knowledge about finances or investment, just about everybody knows, okay, it's a bad idea to put all your money in one stock, right? It's like, okay, well, sure, if that stock goes down, you're screwed. So don't do that. Diversify. And yet, for so many of us, at the other end, the way that we earn the money in the first place, we are not sufficiently diversified. If we have a job, if we have, one job with one paycheck from one place, if that changes for some reason, and we all know, we've all seen these things can change overnight without warning, then we go from 100 to 0. And there's no backup. And I know firsthand that's an incredibly precarious place to be in. I was given 1 week's severance as a journalist.
Yikes.
And yeah, really generous, these folks. And so literally I immediately had to go out and try to find something, find some way to pay my rent. And it was terrifying because I was laid off the day before 9/11. And so I woke up the next morning, the first day of my unemployment, and we have the largest terrorist attack on American soil. This is not a good time to be looking for a job. And I thought, oh my God, I am screwed. And I had so much stress. We were all stressed because it was this horrible time. And I was stressed because I did not know how I was going to pay my bills. And the antidote, what I have discovered is the only antidote to that, is being diversified in terms of how you earn money. And so today I actually earn money in 7 different ways. And that is something, it doesn't just sort of happen. I really tried very deliberately to cultivate that. I make money from writing books, from doing business school teaching, from coaching, from management consulting, from online courses that I do, from keynote speaking, and from doing affiliate marketing, where sometimes I'll promote a product, from a colleague that I believe in, and then get an affiliate payment for it. And so that has been really helpful to me, because I know that no matter what sort of economic shocks or disruptions are out there, it would be very hard for all 7 of those to be disrupted at the same time. And so I believe that every professional, even if you have a quote unquote day job, even if you're working for somebody else, you can and you should be thinking about how to cultivate side income streams. And so for people in the the culinary world, there's a lot of things that you could be doing. I mean, yeah, let's say you work full time at a restaurant, or you operate your own restaurant, something like that. Great. What else can you be doing? Could you, for instance, do side projects with sites like kitchen surfing, or could you do, some private chef things? Sure. Could you do, coaching and workshops? Could you perhaps start an online course? Could you start writing an article once a week for the local newspaper or for a blog with recipes or with tips or, ways to think about healthy eating, or, whatever your sort of particular flavor is in the culinary world, whatever you're passionate about, whether it's, paleo or whether it's Indian cuisine or what have you. I mean, there's just different ways that you can think about this. Maybe there's sidelines with other hobbies you have, like let's say you're really into food photography. If you're also a photographer, maybe you could teach people that, or create an ebook about that. So there's a lot of options.
And I think at the same time, you have your core competency, having these different side income streams, at least for me, because I do some speaking, writing, doing that stuff helps me stay creative and out of ruts, because I'm not doing the same thing every day all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Chris. Ideally, what you want is to create a kind of symbiotic ecosystem in terms of your work. And so as long as the core is the same, like for instance, for restaurant professionals, if that's the realm that they're working in, you can actually see these pieces come together. Let's say someone comes to your restaurant and they love it and they say, oh, this is so great. Could you cater my wedding? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, maybe we can do that. Oh, this is so great. Could you do a private workshop for my company. Oh, yeah, okay. And then, the next person might meet you for the first time at the private workshop for their company. And then, they're looking for a place to, to bring their next networking dinner for 30 people. Oh, so they bring it back to your restaurant. You want it, you want the pieces to fit together so that everything you're doing is helping every other thing that you're doing.
I like it, Dorie. Now, one other one for me. There's some schools of thought that say people should just take the leap, jump, and then they'll figure it out. And then there's some people that say do something on the side. And if you have a job, don't leave the umbrella of that steady paycheck. Do you lean toward one side or another? Is it situational? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I try to be very practical about this, and so I would say it depends almost entirely on what your savings is, what your financial situation is. I mean, if you have plenty of money, let's say you have a spouse that earns lots of money, or you're just an incredible saver, or you have some lucky trust fund, then God bless you, do whatever you want. If you want to leap into entrepreneurship, go for it. But for the vast majority of us, that's not the case. And I know from the feeling of terror that I had when I got laid off from my newspaper job that it is a bad place to be worried about where the money is going to come from and how you are going to pay for the necessities of life. And so for anyone who is in the situation where that might be the case, I would urge them to be a bit more cautious. And I think that there's really productive ways to do it. I think a lot of times we paint the situation as this sort of either or, like, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to do this, or I'm never going to be able to gain traction unless I just plunge in and do something full time. But really, that's not the case. You can be very strategic over a long term. And one of my favorite examples actually comes from my first book, Reinventing You. There was a woman that I profiled named Patricia Fripp. And of all things, she started her career as a hairdresser in San Francisco. And she decided that she was very passionate about public speaking. That was her favorite thing. And so she wanted to eventually become a full-time keynote speaker. But, it's a very hard position to get into. I mean, lots of people would like to be paid speakers. But so she had signed a 10-year lease on her hair salon. And she said, you know what? I'm going to take these 10 years and I'm going to make it happen. And so what she did was, she spent most of her time at her regular job as a hairdresser, but she worked on the side to build up her speaking practice, and any money that she earned early on, she would reinvest in her business. And so she got all the stuff she needed. She was meeting her necessities by being a hairdresser, but any money she earned from speaking, she would reinvest, like getting coaching so she was a better speaker, or getting really good photos and a video reel, all the stuff so she could market herself successfully. And so she kept doing it, kept reinvesting, kept building up her business. And so by the time the 10 years had passed and her salon lease was up, she had more than replaced her income from the salon business with money she was making as a keynote speaker. And so she was able to close down the salon with no worries and no regrets, because she had taken that long runway and she had very successfully transitioned over the years. And not everybody wants to do it over a 10-year period, but even if you're talking about 2 years or 5 years, you can really build up something significant and meaningful on the side.
Such a good point. I hope people take that to heart.
Thank you so much, Dorie, for joining us. I think that's a good kind of summation of what you've instilled through your work, throughout your work in the different books and speaking and your consulting practices. Any final thoughts for the listeners as we kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. One other thing that I'll mention for listeners who are interested in becoming just a little bit more entrepreneurial in your own lives and thinking about how to create multiple income streams in your own business, I actually created a free resource that people can access. If you go to dorieclark.com/entrepreneur, you can download for free my 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment, and that will help walk you step by step through how to apply these principles to your own life and develop multiple income streams.
Very cool. I'm about to go take the test myself.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Dorie, for joining us. We had a blast.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
So that was our conversation with Dorie Clark. Sean, what were your takeaways?
So many good points, Chris. I think number one was her talking about ideas and execution, that ideas are truly a dime a dozen. And I think that really resonated with me, and I hope it resonates with people, to the point that people are not afraid to talk about their ideas, to flesh out their ideas, to get feedback on their ideas, and not be afraid that people are going to, quote, steal their idea, because it takes so much to execute. And chances are the people that you're talking to, they're not as passionate about your idea. The other one for me is pricing strategy, that it's almost like when someone is trying to monetize off of something that they are doing, I think to your point, Chris, that they're so close to it, it means so much to them. And I think that causes people to either overvalue or undervalue things, and it's hard for them to find that sweet spot. I think you overcome this by testing, right? Just testing it in a few markets, testing it at places, and just doing that as much as possible to dial in and find out what is that optimal price. So I think those two things really resonated with me. What about you?
Yeah, and in line with that, she referred to what she talks about in the book Stand Out, where, if you're trying to create this personal brand for yourself or create a product and put it out to market, it's important to have, the three types of people, which are your network, which I think she called like your mentor board of directors, your audience, and your community. And to kind of touch back to one of your earlier points too is, building something in isolation can be one of the worst things that you can do, because you're isolated and you're not hearing any feedback from people in your community that might be able to provide positive feedback for you. And then just also, we talked about towards the end, and it's something that I think both of us really agree with. And for me, it's been part of what's allowed me to build and grow a career, which is the whole idea of the 7 income streams. She mentioned that she does the speaking and the writing, and she's an adjunct professor at Duke, and the consulting, and she's a coach, and all these different ways that she makes money, and how all 7 will never go away at the exact same time. So she'll never have to experience getting laid off and then, oh crap, I'm not going to be able to pay rent this month. So I think it's important for everyone out there, especially with the world changing and not knowing exactly what's going to happen with our future, and whether it's the restaurant world or somewhere else, not being so dependent on other people and other companies, but really taking things into your own hands.
What a great person to talk with, Chris, especially for our audience and where we're at as well in our journeys.
Yeah, for sure. Y'all definitely let us know what you think about the episode, and you can connect with Dorie on Twitter at Dorie, Dorie Clark. She's really active on Twitter. She actually has a great feed, and definitely encourage you to head over to her website as well, which is DorieClark.com/entrepreneur to take the assessment that she mentioned, and check out the book. I'm excited to dive in as well. And Sean, with that, we'll leave them with a quote. And it's been a pleasure as always, buddy.
Absolutely.
For any meaningful business transaction, trust built up over time is the essential ingredient. And with that, we're signing off.